Section Un. Lena. The cough, when it first came, was a small, dry thing. A child's cough. Alara had coughed before, of course. Dust from the Enclave's perpetually recycled air, a chill from a poorly patched wall. Lena had offered water, a comforting hand on her daughter's brow, and thought nothing more of it. But this cough, 2 days later, had a new texture, a dampness, a slight, rasping catch in Alara's small chest that sent a sliver of ice straight into Lena's heart. She knew the sound. They all knew the sound. It was the whisper of the wasting sickness. Panic, cold and sharp, clawed at Lena's throat. No, not Alara. Not her bright, giggling 7-year-old, who still chased dust motes in the slivers of sunlight that pierced their grim habitation block. The Enclave's law was absolute, a commandment etched in the fear of generations. Any sign, any suspicion, and the afflicted were to be surrendered to the wardens. Surrender meant the quarantine pens. And no one returned from the quarantine pens. It was a death sentence, shrouded in the euphemism of containment for the greater good. "Mommy?" Alara's voice, thin and already losing its usual spark, pulled Lena from the precipice of her terror. Her daughter's face, usually flushed with a healthy, rosy glow, was pale, her eyes too bright with a fever Lena hadn't noticed until this very second. Blinded as she'd been by a desperate hope that it was anything but this. Lena forced a smile, a brittle, cracking thing. "Just a little cough, sweetling. We'll get you some warm broth." But her hands trembled as she reached for the tin cup. Her mind raced, a frantic, trapped animal. The wardens, their heavy boots, their impassive faces, their long metal batons. The screams she'd heard, muffled by distance and walls, from families who hadn't been quick enough or compliant enough. There was the rumor, of course, a dangerous whispered thing passed between those who still dared to hope for something beyond the Enclave's gray walls and grayer rules. A 48-hour window. From the first true undeniable sign of the wasting, some said there was a chance, a flicker, outside. Beyond the electrified fences and the kill zones, there were whispers of a natural remedy, a hidden community, a place the sickness hadn't touched. Most dismissed it as folklore, the desperate delusion of the damned. But for Lena, staring at Alara's feverish brow, that delusion was now the only lifeline she could grasp. 48 hours. How much time had already passed? The cough 2 days ago. Was that the start? Or this morning's definite, horrifying rasp? She had to assume the clock was already ticking, devouring precious minutes. "Alara, sweet, I need you to be very quiet now," Lena whispered, her voice strained. She pulled the threadbare blanket higher around her daughter's shoulders. The single room they inhabited felt suddenly like a cage, the chipped concrete walls closing in. Every distant shout, every clatter in the corridor outside, sounded like the approach of doom. She had a small stash of scavenged supplies hidden beneath a loose floor tile, some dried protein strips, a water purification straw, a rusted, sharpened piece of metal she'd always kept, just in case. Just in case of what? She'd never truly defined. Until now. The plan, if it could be called that, was insane. The Enclave's perimeter was a death trap. But staying was a guaranteed death for Alara. A slower, more sanitized one perhaps, but death nonetheless. Internal monologue raged. "How can I do this? She's so small, so weak. The outside, they say it's worse than here. The changed, the ruin. But here is Thorn. Here are the pens." The image of Alara, alone and terrified, being dragged away, solidified Lena's terrible resolve. She pressed her lips to Alara's forehead. "Hot, too hot." "We're going on an adventure, my love," she murmured, her voice thick with unshed tears. "A secret one, just you and me." Alara's eyes, clouded with sickness, still held a flicker of trust. "A secret?" "The biggest secret," Lena affirmed, her heart a stone in her chest. She moved to the loose tile, prying it up with trembling fingers. The meager supplies looked pitiful against the monumental task ahead. 48 hours. It wasn't just a time frame, it was a death knell or a prayer. And Lena, with nothing left but a mother's ferocious, desperate love, was gambling everything on that prayer. She had to get Alara out, now. Before the coughing became too loud, too noticeable. Before a neighbor, driven by fear or a pathetic desire for favor, whispered a word to the wardens. The first step was the old service tunnel, 3 blocks over, rumored to be less guarded since the last sector collapse. It was a slim chance, a path fraught with peril. But it was the only path she could see. The alternative was unthinkable. She bundled Alara carefully, whispering reassurances she didn't feel, her own body a live wire of adrenaline and dread. The weight of her daughter, usually a comfort, now felt like an anchor and a spur, both dragging her down and driving her forward into the terrifying unknown. The stale air of the room seemed to suffocate her, thick with the metallic tang of fear and the unspoken sentence of the wardens. Section 2. Silas. The re-education hall stank of stale sweat and fear, overlaid with the sharp antiseptic scent Warden Thorne seemed to exude personally. Silas stood at attention, his back straight, gaze fixed on the peeling propaganda poster behind Thorne's head, a heroic, stylized warden shielding a grateful family from shadowy, clawed hands representing the wasting. The irony wasn't lost on him, though he kept his face a mask of bored compliance. The sickness does not discriminate. Thorne's voice boomed, each word a hammer blow against the silence. He paced before the assembled wardens, his polished boots echoing on the grimy floor. It does not reason, it does not pity. It is a blight upon us, a test of our resolve, our purity. Silas suppressed a sigh. He'd heard this speech, or variations of it, countless times since he'd donned the gray uniform of the Enclave wardens. Thorne, a man whose face seemed permanently set in a sneer of righteous conviction, was a true believer, or a damn good actor. Silas suspected the former. It made the man's cruelty all the more chilling. Our protocols are not suggestions, Thorne continued, his eyes, like chips of obsidian, scanning the ranks. They are the bedrock of our survival. Every citizen understands their duty. Report the afflicted, immediately, without sentiment. Sentiment is weakness. Sentiment is a crack in the wall that protects us all. A young warden near the front, Rorik, barely out of his teens and still shiny with indoctrination, shifted his weight. Silas saw the flicker of a question in the boy's eyes. Don't do it, kid, Silas thought, a familiar weariness settling over him. Too late. Warden Thorne, sir. Rorik's voice was reedy, uncertain. The families. When we take the afflicted, is there no comfort offered? No news of their progress in the pens? Thorne stopped pacing. The silence in the hall became absolute, charged with a sudden, dangerous energy. He turned slowly, deliberately, until his gaze pinned Rorik to the spot. Comfort, Warden Rorik? Thorne's voice was deceptively soft. Is it comfort you think they deserve? Those who would endanger the entire enclave with their contamination, their progress, he spat the word, is eradication, swift, efficient, necessary. Rorik flinched, color draining from his face. Yes, sir. Understood, sir. You will understand this, Warden. Thorne's voice rose again, hard and unforgiving. The moment sentimentality clouds your judgment, you become as much a threat as the sickness itself. You will follow orders. You will enforce the protocols. You will excise the rot. Is that clear? Crystal clear, sir, Rorik stammered. Silas felt a familiar knot tighten in his stomach. He remembered his own early days, the raw idealism that had been systematically beaten out of him, replaced by a cynical pragmatism that was the only way to survive being a cog in Thorne's machine. He'd joined the wardens after the sickness took his younger sister, years ago, in the first chaotic wave. He'd thought, naively, he could make a difference, ensure fairness, perhaps even find a way to fight the disease itself from within the system. Instead, he'd become a dealer of despair, a harbinger of loss. There are whispers, Thorne said, his gaze sweeping over them again, lingering on Silas for a moment too long, as if sensing his internal dissent. Rumors of concealment, of families attempting to hide the tainted. This will not be tolerated. He slammed a fist onto the rickety lectern, making it jump. Sector patrols will be doubled. Sweeps will be conducted, block by block. We will root out this treachery. Any warden found, lenient, will face the consequences alongside those they sought to shield. His eyes met Silas's again, a direct, cold challenge. Silas held his gaze, his expression unreadable. He thought of the faces he'd seen, the raw grief, the terror, the utter hopelessness. He thought of his sister's small, fevered hand in his. For the greater good, the words tasted like ash in his mouth. Thorne concluded, there is a report. Sector Gamma, Habitation Block 12. A child, Elara Vance, 7 years old, failed to report for the morning nutritional supplement distribution. Neighbors claimed to have heard coughing. He paused, letting the implication sink in. Warden Silas, you know that sector. Take a detachment, investigate. And Silas, Thorne's lips curled into something that might have been a smile if it weren't so devoid of warmth. Bring me results, not excuses. A cold dread seeped into Silas. Block 12. He knew a few families there. He'd seen a little girl with bright, inquisitive eyes and dark curls playing near the water dispensary just last week. Elara. The name echoed in the sterile silence of the hall, a premonition of the grim duty that awaited him. He nodded curtly. Yes, Warden Thorne. As he turned to leave, the weight of his uniform, of his role, felt heavier than ever. The sweep was an escalation, a tightening of the noose, and he was once again the one holding the rope. The image of the child, Elara, was already forming in his mind, a ghost he would soon be tasked with creating. Section 3. Lena. The air in the service tunnel was thick, cloying, a miasma of rust, damp earth, and something else, something indefinably rotten that spoke of long neglect and decay. Lena pressed herself against the sweating concrete wall, Elara, a warm, fragile weight in her arms. Her daughter was asleep, a restless, fever-induced slumber, punctuated by soft whimpers and a cough that tore through Lena like shrapnel with every recurrence. Each rasp seemed to echo unnaturally in the narrow, lightless passage. Lightless, except for the anemic beam of the scavenged glow stick Lena held in a trembling hand. It cast long, dancing shadows that writhed like living things, turning familiar shapes into monstrous illusions. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the oppressive silence of the tunnel. Silence, she reminded herself, was good. Silence meant no patrols, no heavy boots, no shouted commands. But silence also amplified every drip of water, every skittering sound in the darkness. Rats, probably, or worse. She'd chosen this route precisely because it was old, partially collapsed in sections, and generally considered too unstable for regular warden patrols. The entrance had been hidden behind a pile of refuse in a disused sanitation annex, a secret shared in hushed tones by a desperate few. Getting there had been a nightmare of slinking through shadowed alleyways, her senses screaming at every flicker of movement, every distant sound. Elara, bless her, had been mostly quiet, too ill to protest, but her fever was rising. Lena could feel the heat radiating from her small body, a terrifying furnace. 48 hours. How many gone? 10, 12. The thought was a spur, driving her onward despite the burning in her lungs and the ache in her arms. A section of the tunnel ahead was choked with fallen debris, twisted metal struts, chunks of concrete, the skeletal remains of old pipes. It was a narrow crawl space, barely wide enough for an adult. Lena's breath hitched. She couldn't carry Elara through that. Elara, sweetling, wake up for a moment, she whispered, gently shaking her daughter. Elara's eyes fluttered open, glazed and unfocused. Mommy, thirsty. Soon, my love, soon. I need you to be brave. Can you crawl a little way? Just through there? Lena pointed the glow stick at the narrow opening. The child looked, her lower lip trembling. Fear, stark and primal, warred with the lethargy of her illness. But in the dim light, Lena saw a flicker of the resilience that had always surprised her in her daughter. Elara nodded, a tiny, jerky movement. Lena set her down gently, her own body screaming in protest. She pushed their meager supply sack ahead of her, then squeezed into the tight space, the rough concrete scraping her back and knees. The air here was even fouler, stagnant and heavy. Panic, sharp and tasting of bile, rose in her throat. What if it collapses? What if we get stuck? Come on, Elara. Follow Mommy, she urged, her voice strained. She could hear Elara's small grunts and whimpers behind her. It was agonizingly slow. Every inch felt like a mile. The darkness pressed in, suffocating. Then, a sound, distant but unmistakable. Heavy, rhythmic thuds, boots, and voices, muffled but drawing closer from the direction they had come. Lena froze. Her blood turned to ice. No, not now, not here. They were in the main tunnel section beyond the crawl space. The patrol must have entered from another access point, or perhaps the main tunnel wasn't as disused as the rumors suggested. Faster, Ilara, please, Lena hissed, desperation making her voice harsh. She pushed herself forward with frantic energy, heedless of the scrapes and bruises. The end of the crawl space was just ahead, another patch of utter blackness. She scrambled out, then turned, reaching back for Ilara, pulling her through the last few feet. Ilara was crying now, small, terrified sobs that Lena tried to muffle against her shoulder. The boots were louder, closer. A beam of a powerful flashlight cut through the darkness further down the tunnel, sweeping back and forth, momentarily blinding Lena. "Anything?" a gruff voice called out. "Nah, just rats and rubble, like always. Why Thorn insists we check these damn holes," another voice grumbled. Lena's mind raced. There was nowhere to hide. The tunnel walls were sheer, featureless. They were trapped. She clutched Ilara tighter, shielding her body with her own, her eyes darting wildly for any shadow, any recess. The beam was coming closer, slicing through the darkness like a scythe. Her breath hitched, trapped in her chest. This was it. They were caught. The whispered hope of 48 hours was about to be extinguished in the grime and despair of a forgotten tunnel. Section 4. Silas. The door to Habitation Unit 7, Block 12, splintered under the impact of Silas's boot. Protocol dictated a forceful entry if no response was given after the third announcement. There had been no response. Only a heavy, cloying silence from within, a silence that always felt more ominous than screams. He stepped inside, Rorik and another warden, a hardened veteran named Gravis, flanking him. The single room was small, squalid, typical of the lower sector dwellings. An overturned stool, a cold cookpot, a pallet of bundled rags that served as a bed, empty. "Clear," Gravis barked, his voice unnecessarily loud in the confined space. Rorik, still pale from Thorn's earlier dressing down, poked at the bedding with his baton. "No one here, Warden Silas." Silas scanned the room, his experienced eyes missing nothing. A faint, almost imperceptible scent lingered in the air, not just the usual enclave stench of mildew and unwashed bodies. Something else. Something medicinal, herbal. And underneath it, the faintest, sickly sweet odor he'd come to associate with the early stages of the wasting. His stomach clenched. "The mother's name is Lena Vance. The child, Ilara," Silas stated, more to himself than the others. He ran a hand over the rough-hewn table. A small, crudely carved wooden bird lay on its side, as if dropped in haste. He picked it up, smooth from handling, a child's toy. He remembered his sister, Anya. She'd had a little cloth doll, its button eyes shiny with her affection. The memory was a dull ache, a wound that never truly healed. He'd been Rorik's age then, helpless, watching as men in similar gray uniforms had taken Anya away. He'd sworn then that he would be different, stronger. But strength, in the Enclave, often meant cruelty. "Neighbors said they heard coughing for 2 days, Gravis reported, his face impassive. "Child hasn't been seen since yesterday morning. Mother bought black market feverfew tea 3 days ago from Old Man Hemlock down in Sector B. Risky, means she knew, or suspected. Feverfew. That explained the herbal scent, a pathetic attempt to mask the symptoms, to buy time. Silas understood the desperation. He also understood the law. "They can't have gone far," Rorik said, a hint of eagerness in his voice, perhaps to redeem himself in Thorn's eyes. "We can seal the block exits, search unit by unit." Silas looked at the small wooden bird in his hand. Ilara Vance, 7 years old. He imagined a mother's terror, the frantic calculations, the impossible choice. He also saw Thorn's face, cold and resolute. "Bring me results." "No," Silas said slowly. "A block-by-block search will cause panic, drive them deeper. She's trying to run. If she's smart, she's not thinking about hiding within the walls. She's thinking about getting out." Gravis raised an eyebrow. "Outside, with a sick kid? That's suicide." "Or a mother's last resort," Silas murmured. He thought of the rumored service tunnel access points. Most were sealed or regularly patrolled. But there was one, near the old sanitation annex of Sector Gamma, officially condemned, but old Enclave schematics he'd once studied for a different reason showed it might still connect to the outer perimeter drains. A long shot, a desperate gamble. exactly the kind a desperate mother might take. Rorik, check the transit logs for any unscheduled maintenance requests near Sector Gamma's periphery. Gravis, come with me. We're going to take a walk through some forgotten history. As they left the small, empty room, Silas pocketed the wooden bird. It felt strangely heavy in his hand. He was hunting a mother and her sick child. He was doing his duty. But for the first time in a long while, the justifications felt hollow, the gray of his uniform more like a shroud. He wasn't just investigating a missing child anymore. He was actively pursuing them, and the knowledge sat like a stone in his gut. He remembered Thorne's eyes, the implication clear. Failure was not an option, and leniency was treason. The pressure was immense, not just from Thorne, but from the ghosts of his own past, whispering that he was becoming the very thing he'd once despised. He pushed the thought down. Duty was duty. Survival was paramount, for the Enclave, and for himself. Section 5, Lena. The warden's flashlight beam sliced through the oppressive darkness, sweeping closer. Lena pressed herself and Alara so hard against the slimy tunnel wall that she felt the jagged edges of stone bite into her back. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. Alara whimpered, a small, terrified sound Lena tried to muffle with her hand, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Thump, thump, thump. Loud enough, she feared, for the wardens to hear. Smell that? One of the wardens grunted. His voice was closer now, terrifyingly so. Place stinks worse than a corpse pit. Just keep moving, the other replied, his voice bored and impatient. Thorne wants all these bolt holes checked. Waste of damn time. The beam arced, passing mere inches from where Lena cowered. She held her breath, squeezed her eyes shut, bracing for the inevitable shout of discovery, the rough hands, the end of their desperate flight. Ilara was trembling violently in her arms. Then, miraculously, the beam moved on. The footsteps receded, the voices fading down the tunnel in the direction Lena had come. They hadn't seen her. Lena waited, muscles screaming with tension, until the sounds were almost gone. Only then did she allow herself a shaky, silent exhale, a reprieve, a tiny, fragile miracle. But they weren't safe. Not yet. That patrol could double back, or there could be others. Come on, baby, she whispered, her voice hoarse. She forced her aching legs to move, stumbling onward into the deeper blackness, away from the wardens. Alara was listless now, her small body terrifyingly hot. The fever was consuming her. Lena's hope, so briefly rekindled, flickered precariously. The 48 hours, how much time left? The tunnel began to slope upwards. The air changed, a subtle shift from stagnant decay to something fresher, carrying the faint, metallic tang of rain and something else, something wild. Ahead, a pinprick of gray light. Lena's heart leaped. Could it be an exit? She scrambled forward, driven by a fresh surge of adrenaline. The light grew, resolving into a jagged opening, partially obscured by a rusted metal grate, bent and twisted as if by some immense force. Beyond it, sky. A bruised, dawn sky, heavy with clouds but sky nonetheless. And trees, skeletal and black against the dim light, but undeniably trees. They were out, or almost. Lena attacked the grate with desperate strength. It was wedged tight. She pulled, grunted, her fingers raw and bleeding. It wouldn't budge. Panic threatened to engulf her again. Alara coughed, a wet, racking sound that echoed unnervingly in the confined space. No, 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 Lena sobbed, yanking at the grate with renewed ferocity. We're so close. She saw a heavy piece of conduit lying nearby, dislodged from the tunnel wall. With a guttural cry, she hefted it, slamming it against the weakest point of the grate, where the metal was already buckled. Once, twice. On the third strike, with a screech of tortured metal, a section of the grate gave way, bending outwards enough for a small body to squeeze through. Lena didn't hesitate. She pushed Alara through the gap first, then wriggled out after her, collapsing onto damp, muddy earth, gasping for breath. They were in a gully, overgrown with thorny bushes and tangled weeds. The air, cool and damp, smelled of wet soil, decaying leaves, and a faint, unsettling sweetness she couldn't place. It was a stark contrast to the recycled, sterile air of the Enclave. Here, life, however wild and untamed, persisted. But the world outside was a grim panorama of decay. the skeletal remains of buildings clawed at the horizon, silhouetted against the bruised dawn. A chill wind whipped around them, carrying with it a low, mournful moan that could have been the wind itself, or something far more sinister. This was the ruin, the world the Enclave wardens warned them about, the reason for their fortified existence. Alara shivered violently, her teeth chattering. Her eyes were wide, unseeing. "We made it, baby," Lena whispered, stroking her daughter's damp hair. "We made it out." But the triumph was hollow. Escape from the Enclave was only the first hurdle. Now they faced the true wild, the sickness itself, and the changed. Those poor souls consumed by the later stages of the wasting, driven mad, their bodies twisted. And Alara was fading. Her breathing was shallow, her skin a ghastly gray. Lena pressed her ear to Alara's chest. The heartbeat was faint, thready. Tears streamed down Lena's face. She had risked everything to get here, fought her way out of one prison only to find herself in a larger, more terrifying one. The 48-hour window felt like it was slamming shut. The hope she'd clung to was dissolving into the cold morning mist. She had to find shelter, warmth, anything. But where? In this desolate wasteland, every shadow seemed to hide a new threat, and her daughter was dying in her arms. The raw, untamed wilderness was a stark, brutal counterpoint to the Enclave's oppressive order. One a cage of rules, the other a cage of chaos. Section 6. Jax. The crow, perched atop the rusted skeleton of a pre-outbreak comms tower, gave a sharp, agitated caw. Jax, hunkered down in a copse of mutated graybriar, lowered his scavenged optics. The crow was his early warning system, better than any tripwire. It rarely got worked up over deer or the feral dog packs. This was different. Human scent, most likely. Or worse. He'd been tracking a trio of bloaters, late-stage wasted, swollen and oozing, that had wandered too close to his primary water source. He preferred to deal with them at a distance. A well-placed crossbow bolt to the overpressurized chest cavity usually did the trick. Messy, but effective. Humans, though. Humans were unpredictable, more dangerous in many ways than the changed. Through the optics, he scanned the gully where the crow's attention was fixed. At first, nothing. Just the usual tangle of thorny vines and sickly-looking scrub. Then, a flicker of movement. A woman, he registered. Small, bedraggled, moving with the desperate, exhausted gait of someone at the end of their rope, and she was carrying something. A bundle. No, a child. Jax's lips thinned. A child. That complicated things. Children were liabilities in this world. Bait. Noise. Another mouth to feed, if you were foolish enough to take them in. He wasn't foolish. He was a survivor. Had been for 15 years, ever since the Enclave slammed their gates shut and left the rest of humanity to rot. He watched Lena, though he didn't know her name, struggle out of what looked like an old storm drain outlet. He knew this area. Knew most of the bolt holes from the nearby Enclave. Desperate fools, always thinking the grass was greener. It wasn't greener. It was just different shades of dead. The woman collapsed, cradling the child. Even from this distance, Jax could see the kid was in a bad way. Limp, too still, the wasting most likely. Early stage, judging by the lack of visible lesions or aggressive transformation, but definitely on its way. His first instinct was to melt back into the undergrowth. Let them be. Not his problem. He had enough of his own. His cache of dried meat was low. The bloaters were still out there. And Enclave patrols sometimes ventured this far, though rarely. A woman and a sick kid were just trouble waiting to happen. They'd attract scavs, ferals, or worse, a warden patrol with an itchy trigger finger. He adjusted the focus on his optics. The woman was weeping now, her shoulders shaking. She was pressing her face into the child's hair. A primal sound of grief, raw and animalistic, carried faintly on the wind, even over the distance. Jax felt an unwelcome twinge, something he hadn't felt in a long, long time. Pity? No. Pity was a luxury. It was recognition. He remembered his own sister, Mara, her small hand clutching his as they ran from the first wave of the changed, before the Enclaves even had walls. Mara hadn't made it. The memory was a shard of glass in his gut. He lowered the optics, scrubbing a hand over his grimy, bearded face. The woman was clearly an Enclave rat. Fresh meat. Easy pickings for some. But she had fight in her, to make it this far with a sick child. And the kid, Damn it. His rules were simple. Rule 1, survive. Rule 2, trust no one. Rule 3, don't get involved. But the image of the woman, alone, grieving in the desolate wasteland, stuck with him. And the child, a dying child. There was nothing to be gained by helping, only risk, exposure, loss of precious resources. He watched for another 10 minutes. The woman didn't move, just rocked the child, her despair a palpable thing even from afar. No other threats appeared. The bloaters seemed to have moved on. The wind whispered through the dead trees, a mournful sigh. Damn it all. Against his better judgment, against every instinct honed by years of brutal self-preservation, Jax made a decision. He slung his crossbow over his shoulder, checked the knife at his belt. He wasn't going to offer charity. He wasn't going to be a savior. But maybe he could offer a warning, or a quick, clean end, if it came to that. Better than leaving them to the changed or the slow, agonizing crawl of the wasting. He began to move, silent as a shadow, down the slope towards the gully. His motives were a tangled knot in his own mind, a flicker of that long-buried empathy, a pragmatic assessment that a noisy, grieving woman could draw unwanted attention to his territory, perhaps even a morbid curiosity. Whatever it was, it propelled him forward, into the unknown orbit of another's desperation. The crow on the tower watched him go, then let out a single, knowing caw before taking flight. Section sept, Lena, Jax. Lena didn't hear him approach. One moment she was alone in her despair, cradling Alara's chilling form. The next a shadow detached itself from the gray landscape, solidifying into the shape of a man. She gasped, scrambling backward, pulling Alara tighter, the rusted metal shard she carried flashing uselessly in her hand. The man was tall, lean, draped in layers of patched, earth-toned fabrics that made him blend with the desolate surroundings. A crossbow was slung across his back, a wicked-looking knife sheathed at his hip. His face, framed by a shaggy, dark beard and equally unkempt hair, was all hard angles and suspicion, his eyes narrowed, watchful, like a predator's. "Easy," he said, his voice a low rumble, rough as stones. He held up his hands, palms open, though Lena didn't relax an inch. "Not looking for trouble." "Stay back," Lena cried, her voice hoarse, cracking. "Don't come any closer." The man stopped a few paces away. His gaze flickered from Lena to Alara, then back to Lena. There was no pity in his eyes, only a grim, assessing look. Kids got the wasting. It wasn't a question. Lena flinched as if struck. "She's just sick. A fever." The lie sounded pathetic even to her own ears. The man snorted, a dry, humorless sound. "Fever's how it starts, Enclave rat. Seen it 1,000 times." He nodded towards the bent grate of the service tunnel. "You came from in there?" Lena didn't answer, her mind racing. Was he a scavenger? A bandit? Would he try to take their meager supplies? Or worse? "Look," he said, his voice softening fractionally, though his eyes remained hard. "You're drawing attention, sitting out here in the open. Changed can smell sickness a mile off. And wardens, they sometimes patrol this far when they lose one of their flock." Fear, fresh and cold, pierced through Lena's grief. "Wardens? Here? I don't know where to go," she whispered, the fight draining out of her. Alara felt so light, so fragile. The man was silent for a long moment, studying them. Lena could feel the seconds stretching, each one a hammer blow against her rapidly dwindling hope. He seemed to be weighing something in his mind. "There's a place," he said finally, grudgingly. "Shelter. Not much, but it's dry, hidden. Can't stay here." Lena stared at him, suspicion warring with a desperate, grasping hope. Why would this stranger help them? What did he want? Why? He shrugged, a gesture that seemed to dismiss the question. "Kid looks bad. Maybe I'm tired of seeing kids die. Or maybe I just don't want your screams bringing bloaters down on my patch. Take your pick." Lena hesitated. Trusting him was a monumental risk. But what choice did she have? Alara was fading. The cold wind was biting through their thin clothes, and the thought of wardens. "Okay," she breathed. "Please." The man, who hadn't offered a name, grunted. "Call me Jax." He turned. "Follow me. And keep quiet. Anything happens, you do exactly what I say. Got it?" Lena nodded, struggling to her feet, Alara a leaden weight in her arms. Jax moved with a surprising speed and silence, navigating the treacherous terrain as if born to it. Lena stumbled after him, her gaze fixed on Alara's pale face. The shelter was a collapsed cellar beneath the ruins of an old farmhouse, accessible only through a cleverly concealed trapdoor hidden beneath a pile of debris. Inside, it was damp and smelled of earth, but it was blessedly out of the wind. Jax lit a small, sputtering tallow lamp, casting flickering shadows on the crumbling stone walls. He gestured to a pile of old sacks in a corner. "Put her down there." Lena gently laid Alara down, tucking the thin blanket around her. Alara didn't stir. Her breathing was so shallow, it was barely perceptible. "There's a rumor," Lena said, her voice barely above a whisper, her eyes fixed on Jax. 48 hours, from the first real sign. They say there's a chance. Something, a cure, or a safe place, outside. Jax was tending to the lamp, his back to her. He didn't turn, but she saw his shoulders tense. "Rumors are cheap, Enclave. Hope's a dangerous thing out here." "But have you heard it?" Lena pressed, desperation making her bold. "Is it true? Anything?" He finally turned, his face grim in the flickering lamplight. "Heard lots of things. Most of them are just stories people tell themselves before they die." He looked at Alara, then back at Lena. "Kid's got maybe a few hours, not 48, not like that." Lena's fragile hope shattered. Tears welled, hot and stinging. "No." Suddenly, Alara gasped, a small, choked sound. Her eyes flew open, wide and terrified, but unseeing. She began to convulse, her small body arching, limbs flailing. "Alara!" Lena screamed, rushing to her side. Jax was there in an instant, his earlier cynicism gone, replaced by a grim urgency. "Hold her head. Don't let her bite her tongue." The seizure was violent, terrifying. Lena held Alara, whispering her name, tears streaming down her face, her heart breaking into a million pieces. This was it, the end. The wasting was claiming her. The 48 hours, the desperate flight, all for nothing. Jax's hand on her shoulder was surprisingly steady, a small, unexpected anchor in the storm of her despair. The flickering lamplight cast their shadows, large and distorted, on the damp stone, a tableau of grief and impending loss. Section 8. Silas. The deeper Silas delved into the Enclave's archives, the more uneasy he became. Warden Thorne had been clear: find the Vance woman and her infected child. But Silas's pursuit had led him down a rabbit hole of inconsistencies and classified reports regarding the wasting sickness and, more specifically, the quarantine pens. He was in the sub-level records, a place few wardens ever accessed, a dusty mausoleum of forgotten directives and redacted truths. Officially, he was searching for historical perimeter breach reports that might indicate Lena Vance's escape route. Unofficially, he was pulling at a thread that had snagged his conscience: Rorik's naive question about comfort and progress in the pens. What he found was disturbing. The official narrative, the one Thorne spouted in the re-education hall, was that the afflicted were contained, their suffering minimized, their eventual demise a regrettable necessity for the Enclave's survival. But the fragmented, heavily censored medical logs Silas managed to access hinted at something else. Vague references to accelerated decline, specimen viability, and Phase 2 research. Research into what? The wasting was supposedly incurable. Then he found it, a requisition order, signed by Thorne himself, for Type 7 sedatives, high dosage and nutrient paste. Grade F, non-viable subjects, to be delivered to the pens. Non-viable subjects, not patients, not afflicted, subjects. A cold dread trickled down Silas's spine. He thought of the rumors, the ones even hardened wardens dismissed as fear-mongering, that the pens weren't just about containment, but about something far more sinister. That the Enclave wasn't just letting the wasted die, they were using them. He cross-referenced the dates of these requisitions with reports of supply shortages in the general populace. A pattern emerged. Whenever a new cure initiative was announced with great fanfare by the Enclave Council, always ending in quiet failure, activity and resource allocation to the pens spiked. Could it be that the Enclave wasn't trying to cure the wasting but cultivate it, study its progression in a controlled if brutal manner, or worse, harvest something from the dying? The thought was monstrous, an abyss of cynicism that threatened to swallow him whole. He remembered a hushed conversation he'd overheard years ago between two senior medtechs who thought they were alone. Something about biomarkers and antigenic responses found only in late-stage pre-mortem subjects. At the time, he dismissed it as technical jargon. Now it took on a horrifying new meaning. The 48-hour rumor that Lena Vance was likely chasing. What if its origins were tied to this? What if that window wasn't about hope, but about a specific stage of the sickness the Enclave researchers found particularly valuable? The idea made him feel physically ill. His datapad beeped, an incoming communique from Thorne. Urgent. Report to my office. Now. Silas's blood ran cold. Had Thorne discovered his unauthorized access to the archives, or was this just about the Vance case? He wiped the datapad, logged out of the system, his mind reeling. He had to get out of sub-level records before anyone found him here. As he navigated the dim, dusty corridors, the weight of what he'd uncovered pressed down on him. The Enclave wasn't just an oppressive regime. It was built on a foundation of horrific lies, its survival predicated on the systematic exploitation of its most vulnerable. His sister, Anya, had she been a non-viable subject? Had her small, fevered body been used for some ghastly research? The rage that surged through him was cold, sharp, and terrifyingly clear. He reached Thorne's office, the polished plasteel door gleaming ominously. He smoothed his uniform, composed his face into its usual mask of stoic obedience. But beneath the surface, a seismic shift had occurred. The warden's gray was no longer just a uniform, it was the color of complicity. Thorne was waiting, his obsidian eyes narrowed. "Warden Silas, you've been busy." The tone was laced with suspicion. "Any progress on the Vance woman and her contagion?" Silas met his gaze, his own carefully blank. "Leads suggest she may have attempted an exit through the old Sector Gamma storm drains, unconfirmed." "Unconfirmed?" Thorne sneered. "I expect confirmation, Silas, not conjecture. That woman and her diseased offspring are a threat. Find them. Neutralize the threat." Neutralize. Not apprehend. Not return. Neutralize. The word hung in the sterile air like a death sentence. "And Silas," Thorne added, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial murmur, though his eyes remained hard. "There are elements within the Enclave, weak-minded fools, who might misunderstand our necessary research. Any sensitive information regarding the pens or our methods for combating the wasting is strictly classified. Leaks will be treated as treason. Am I understood?" The threat was unmistakable. Thorne knew, or at least suspected, that Silas had been digging. Silas felt a chasm open before him. On one side, continued loyalty to this monstrous system, a path of self-preservation but soul-crushing guilt. On the other, an unknown abyss, rebellion, exposure, certain death if he failed. He thought of Alara Vance, the small wooden bird, the mother's desperate flight. He thought of Anya. "Perfectly, Warden Thorne," Silas said, his voice level, betraying none of the turmoil within. But as he turned to leave, a new, dangerous resolve began to solidify in his heart. The Enclave's true intentions were far darker than simple oppression, and he could no longer be a part of it. The question was, what could one man do against such a deeply entrenched evil? And could he reach Lena Vance before Thorne's other hunters did? The sweep was still active, and Thorne had other, less conflicted, wardens at his disposal. The clock was ticking, not just for Alara, but for him too. Section 9. Lena, Jax. Alara's seizure subsided, leaving her limp and pale as death in Lena's arms. The small, cramped cellar was filled with the ragged sound of Lena's sobs and the shallow, almost imperceptible whisper of Alara's breathing. Jax stood by, his face a mask of grim resignation. She's still alive," Lena choked out, feeling for the faint pulse at Alara's neck. It was thready, weak, but it was there. A tiny, stubborn spark refusing to be extinguished. Jax nodded slowly. "For now. But that was a bad one. The wasting. It tears them apart from the inside." He ran a hand through his matted hair, his gaze distant. "There's nothing more you can do for her here." Lena looked up at him, her eyes wild with a desperate, defiant hope she refused to relinquish. "The rumors, Jax. You said most were lies, but not all?" He sighed, a long, weary sound. "There's a place, the old weather station, up in the Blackwood Hills. Some say the air up there, The altitude. Certain herbs that only grow on the highest ridges, they can slow it. Halt the progression even, if you get there in time. He looked directly at Lena. It's a hell of a climb, dangerous country, crawling with changed and worse. Worse, Lena whispered. Other survivors, Jack said grimly. Not all of them are looking to share, and warden patrols have been sighted further out than usual lately. Seems your enclave is getting nervous. Lena's heart sank. Wardens. But then, the alternative, to stay here, to watch Alara fade, it was unthinkable. The weather station, she repeated, the name a fragile talisman. Is it true? Is there really a chance? Jack shrugged, his expression unreadable. Don't know. Never been. Heard stories from traders, drifters. Most who go looking for it don't come back. But, he paused, looking at Alara's still form. You ain't got many other cards to play, do you? Lena's resolve hardened. She wouldn't give up. Not while Alara still breathed. How far is it? Can we make it? Half a day's hard travel if you know the paths and don't run into trouble, Jack said. Trouble's likely, though. He seemed to wrestle with an internal decision. Finally, he grunted. Damn it. All right. I'll take you as far as the foothills. Got business that way anyhow. But you're on your own after that. Relief, sharp and overwhelming, washed over Lena. She wouldn't be alone. Not yet. Thank you, Jax. I don't know how to repay you. Stay alive. Keep the kid quiet. Don't get me killed. That'll be payment enough. He began to check his crossbow, his movements economical and precise. We leave at first light, or what passes for it. It'll be safer to move under the dimmest part of dawn. The hours that followed were a blur of anxiety and fitful, shallow sleep for Lena. She held Alara close, whispering stories, promises, prayers into her unresponsive ear. Jack sat by the cellar entrance, a silent, watchful sentinel. As the first gray, bruised light began to filter through the cracks in the trapdoor, Jax roused them. Time to move. The journey was a nightmare. The terrain outside the immediate vicinity of the enclave was a treacherous ruin. Crumbling roads, shattered buildings, and dense, mutated forests where the shadows seemed to watch with unseen eyes. Jax moved with a hunter's grace, his senses preternaturally alert. Lena, burdened by Alara and her own exhaustion, struggled to keep up. Alara remained terrifyingly still, her breath shallow. Each labored gasp tore at Lena's soul. The 48-hour window, if it had ever truly existed, felt like a distant, mocking memory. Now, it was just a race against the inevitable. They skirted a pack of festering ones, their moans a chilling chorus in the distance, the sweet, sickly scent of their decay carried on the wind. Jax dispatched a lone, skeletal scuttler with a swift, silent crossbow bolt when it lunged from the ruins of a burnt-out vehicle. Lena watched, horrified and grimly grateful. As they neared the foothills of the Blackwood Range, the landscape grew wilder, the trees taller, their branches clawing at the oppressive sky. The air grew colder, thinner. Suddenly Jax froze, holding up a hand. Down, he hissed. Lena dropped to the ground, shielding Alara. Jax peered through a tangle of thorny bushes. Wardens, he breathed, his voice tight. 3 of them, and they're not on a standard patrol route, they're tracking. Lena's blood ran cold. Tracking them? How? Then she saw him. At the head of the small warden patrol, his face grim and set, was Silas, the warden from the tunnel, the one who had almost found them. He was looking at the ground, his expression unreadable, but he was moving with a chilling certainty, directly towards their position. He wasn't just hunting, he knew where they were going. Or at least he was following their trail with unerring accuracy. Had he found something at the tunnel exit, or was it something else? They were trapped. The weather station, their last, desperate hope, was just beyond these hills. But between them and that fragile chance stood the enclave, embodied by the relentless warden who now seemed to be closing in for the kill. Jax knocked a bolt, his eyes narrowed, calculating. Lena clutched Alara, her heart a frantic bird trapped in her ribs. The fleeting respite was over. The final confrontation was upon them. Section 10. Lena, Silas, Jax. The air crackled with unspoken tension. Lena lay flat, Alara a fragile weight beneath her, her breath held tight in her chest. Jax was a coiled spring beside her, crossbow aimed steadily through the thorny screen of bushes. Silas and the 2 other wardens were advancing, methodically, their gray uniforms stark against the decaying greens and browns of the Blackwood foothills. "They're too close to outrun, not with the girl," Jax muttered, his voice a low growl. "If they spot us, it's a firefight. One we're not likely to win." Lena's mind raced. Silas. Why was he so persistent? Was it just duty, or Thorne's orders? She remembered his eyes in the tunnel, not entirely cold, not like the other wardens. Was there something else there? A flicker of hesitation? Or was she just projecting her own desperate hope? Suddenly, Silas stopped. He held up a hand, halting the wardens behind him. He knelt, examining something on the ground, a broken twig, a faint footprint Lena or Jax might have left. His head came up, and for a heart-stopping moment, Lena thought his eyes met hers through the foliage. But instead of raising an alarm, Silas spoke, his voice carrying clearly in the still air. "The trail's gone cold here. Looks like they doubled back towards the river basin, probably trying to lose us in the wetlands." One of the other wardens, a burly man with a scarred face, spat on the ground. "Waste of time then. Let the swamp take 'em, or the changed. Less paperwork for us." The third warden, younger, thinner, looked nervous. But Warden Thorne said, "Warden Thorne isn't out here wading through this muck." Silas cut him off, his voice sharp, authoritative. "We'll sweep the river path. If they're there, we'll flush them out. If not, they're lost to the ruin." He turned, deliberately leading his small team away from Lena and Jax, towards the dense, swampy area to the east. Lena stared, dumbfounded. He was letting them go? Or was this a trick, a ploy to lull them into a false sense of security? Jax remained tensed, crossbow still aimed. "Don't move yet," he whispered. "Could be a feint." They waited, agonizing minutes stretching into an eternity, listening as the sounds of the wardens receded into the distance. Only when the forest fell silent again, save for the sigh of the wind and the distant caw of a crow, did Jax slowly lower his weapon. "Well, I'll be damned," he breathed, looking at Lena with a new, perplexed expression. "Your Enclave friend just bought you some time." Lena felt a confusing mix of relief and suspicion. Why would Silas do that? What did it mean? She had no answers, only the pressing urgency of Alara's fading life. "The weather station," she said, her voice hoarse. "We have to keep going." Jax nodded grimly. "Yeah, but be ready. He might have his reasons, but those other two, if they catch your scent, they won't be so obliging." The final climb to the old weather station was brutal. Alara was terrifyingly light in Lena's arms, her breath shallow, infrequent. Lena stumbled, driven by a primal desperation, Jax beside her, sometimes offering a steadying hand, his earlier cynicism replaced by a grudging respect, or perhaps just a shared sense of fatalism. They reached it as the last vestiges of the grim daylight bled from the sky. The station was a dilapidated structure of rusted metal and broken comms arrays, perched precariously on the highest, wind-scoured ridge. It looked deserted, desolate. "This is it?" Lena whispered, her heart sinking. It looked like just another ruin. "Story says the real part's underground," Jax said, scanning the perimeter. "An old research bunker." They found a heavy steel hatch, almost invisible beneath a tangle of dead vines. It was stiff, but with their combined effort, it creaked open, revealing a dark, narrow staircase descending into the earth. A faint light glowed from below, and a sound, voices. Lena exchanged a wary glance with Jax. He knocked a bolt. "Stay behind me." They descended cautiously. The air grew warmer, cleaner. The stairs opened into a small, surprisingly well-lit chamber. Several people looked up as they entered, gaunt, weary-looking men and women, their clothes patched but clean. And in the center of the room, on a cot, tended by an older woman with kind eyes, was another child, pale but breathing steadily. "Welcome," the older woman said, her voice gentle. "We don't get many visitors, especially not ones who make it past the foothills." Her gaze fell on Alara, and a shadow of sadness crossed her face. "Oh, you poor dear, bring her here." Lena, trembling with exhaustion and a fragile bougainvillea in the Siwang, carried Alara to a makeshift bed. "Is it true?" she asked, her voice cracking. "The air, the herbs?" The woman, who introduced herself as Martha, smiled faintly. "The mountain air is clean, yes, and we have knowledge of herbs, remedies the enclaves have forgotten or suppressed. There's no miracle cure for the wasting child, not for an advanced case, but," She gently touched Alara's forehead. Sometimes, we can ease the passage. Sometimes, if the sickness is caught very early, we can fight it back, give the body a chance to heal itself. For some, there is hope here. As Martha began to tend to Alara, applying a cool compress, murmuring softly, Lena felt a sliver of warmth penetrate the icy despair that had gripped her for so long. It wasn't the definitive cure she'd chased in her frantic 48-hour delusion, but it was something, a chance, a community. Suddenly, a shout from above. "Movement outside, it's wardens, they found the hatch." Jack swore, grabbing his crossbow. Silas, or his friends didn't buy his detour. Panic erupted. The small group in the bunker looked to Martha, then to Jack's. Lena's gaze flew to Alara, her tiny, fragile daughter, finally resting in a place that offered a sliver of peace. She wouldn't let them take her. Not now. Outside, Warden Thorne, his face a mask of cold fury, stood at the lip of the now exposed hatch. He'd followed a secondary tracking signal, one Silas hadn't known about, embedded in all Warden communicators. Silas stood beside him, his expression unreadable, flanked by the two other wardens, their weapons raised. Thorne had anticipated Silas's potential betrayal. "Lena Vance," Thorne's voice boomed into the bunker. "Your futile resistance ends now. Surrender the infected child, and you might be shown leniency." Lena looked at Jax. He met her gaze, a grim understanding passing between them. This was their final stand. Silas watched Thorne, then his gaze shifted to the dark opening of the bunker. He saw a flicker of movement. Lena, defiant. He saw the faces of the others, not monsters, but desperate people clinging to survival. He thought of Anya. He thought of the monstrous lies of the Enclave. The 48 hours were long gone. Hope had narrowed to this single desperate point in time, in this forgotten bunker on a desolate mountain. Hunger for a cure, hunger for freedom, hunger for justice, it all converged here. Thorne gestured to his wardens. "Breach and retrieve. Terminate any who resist." As the wardens started forward, Silas made his choice. He moved, not towards the bunker, but to block Thorne's path. "No, Warden," Silas said, his voice quiet but firm, drawing his own sidearm. "This ends, now." Thorne stared, momentarily stunned by the blatant insubordination, then his face contorted with rage. Traitor. The standoff was absolute, high on a dying mountain, between a desperate mother, a cynical survivor, a conflicted warden, and the unyielding fist of the Enclave. Ilara's fate, and the fate of this tiny sanctuary, hung precariously in the balance, the outcome shrouded in the encroaching darkness.